Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Trust the weekend was great. I apologize for Friday, but I had a day out of the office. I started off at a function with the Rwandan embassy, and there, of course, their rise has been a miraculous one. And then I was at a function at the U.S. ambassador to Kenya, Bob Godek, where he was hosting a very big head honcho from Twitter. Very interesting discussion, insights into the zeitgeist and all kinds. And then I had to get across town to meet with Joshua at KCB, and it took me about an hour and a half, and became a kind of nightmare. As you knew, I was getting later and later for my meeting, and I felt terrible, but eventually got there as well. Saturday morning, had a word with an interview with Henry Rotich, who's the Cabinet Secretary of the National Treasury. That entire interview's uploaded now. Do take a look at it. Interesting, and I also wrote a piece over the weekend, and I'll come to that a little bit later. Macro thoughts, Jamie, so it looks like December, the first US rate hike in Twitter history. The last Fed hike was in June 2006. Larry Summers says central bankers do not have as many tools as they think, because rates are too low to fight another recession. He's not wrong. I liked this photograph. The night sky lights up over the east coast of Sicily as Mount Etna's Voragine crater erupts for the first time in 2 years. The giant plume of smoke and ash thrown up by the blast creates a dazzling display of volcanic lightning, a mysterious phenomenon seen in many of the most powerful volcanic eruptions. Everybody, everywhere has his own movie going, his own scenario, and everybody is acting his movie out like mad. Only most people don't know what is what. They're trapped by their little script. I'd rather be a lightning rod than a seismograph. This is Tom Wolfe, the electric Kool-Aid acid test. You'll understand a little bit later, because my piece on the weekend is all about Kool-Aid. And one more quote from that book. Aldous Huxley compared the brain to a reducing valve. In ordinary perception, the senses send an overwhelming flood of information to the brain, which the brain then filters down to a trickle it can manage for the purpose of survival in a highly competitive world. Man has become so rational, so utilitarian, that the trickle becomes most pale and thin. It is efficient for mere survival, but it screens out the most wondrous part of man's potential experience without his even knowing it. We're shut off from our own world. Powerful stuff. Let me put up a photograph of UN soldiers standing near Muslim faithful. UN soldiers queuing to enter the central mosque in Bangui. This was the day that Pope Francis visited the mosque, which had been under siege from armed Christian militias, to deliver a message of peace and reconciliation, and he is a marvelous Pope. President Obama warned that the mass shooting in California last week showed the terrorist menace has evolved into a new phase of less sophisticated, harder to detect plots. 13-minute speech over the weekend. Venezuelan opposition leaders, and it's now been confirmed that their coalition won control of the legislature from the ruling socialists for the first time in 16 years. And that's a pretty impressive outcome. But of course, we've had extraordinary economic conditions. Interesting piece in The Guardian: Venezuela's high life elite hope hard-hit poor will abandon Chavez's legacy from the vantage point of the well-kept lawns and overstuffed antique chairs of the exclusive Caracas Country Club. Venezuela doesn't look so bad. Much of the oil-rich country is crippled by rising inflation, a lack of basic goods, and rampant violence that could lead to the ruling United Socialist Party losing control of the legislature for the first time in 17 years in Sunday's elections. At this exclusive club set on the leafy slopes of the El Avila mountain, those troubles seem a world away. Elegantly bow-tied waiters offer club members and their guests an extensive menu, including lobster bisque, lobster ceviche, lobster salad, and grilled lobster. Outside the Grand Mansion clubhouse, a sparkling swimming pool gives way to an 18-hole golf course. Dad was visiting over the weekend and remembering a fellow who was a partner of Williamson, who discovered this enormous diamond mine many years ago here in East Africa. And he was saying he used to like to cook lobster, and he said he could remember you'd hear the screams of the lobster because you cook them alive. Saying, the IMF is predicting that the Venezuelan economy will contract 10% this year. The government blames the country's woes on an economic war that it says is being orchestrated by the opposition to drive Maduro out of power. But most polls show that voters are set to punish the administration for that when they elect members to the 167 National Assembly by giving the opposition a voting majority in Parliament. Maduro has said that granting the opposition a victory at the polls would derail Venezuela's revolution. You decide this Sunday if we move forward or if we go off a cliff, Maduro told a rally in Caracas on Thursday night. Economic conditions, these are my conclusions, of this kind are seriously extreme and in regime change territory, and I think this is the first shot across the bows. 10th of August 2015, I said the end is nigh for crude oil and oil producers from Caracas to Luanda, from Riyadh to Abuja. Oil is now below $40 a barrel today. I said the end is nigh for the oil-based rentier economies. President Obama, first Kenyan-American president of the United States, an oil warfare specialist, has scored the equivalent of a hat-trick at the World Cup in how he has advanced the US national interest by using the price of oil as a geopolitical spear. Oil-based economies are going to contract, 10% in Venezuela's case. Currencies which have already collapsed are going to be routed, 97% of devaluation in the Venezuelan currency. Greek-style austerity will be the order of the day. The meltdown is coming. And Bloomberg wrote a piece of how Venezuela's economy has tanked under President Maduro. The Bolivar, have a look at that chart, highest inflation in the world. Look at the black market rate versus the official rate for the Bolivar. 10% contraction this year. Our currency is not being devalued by speculation, but by hyper-speculation, but it's all working in tandem, isn't it? Richard Kapczynski, who I quoted in that article on the 10th of August, if the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. I was saying that the revolution is only just beginning, and I think what we've seen in Venezuela is an expression of that. NATO taunts Russia. Turkey makes hay. MK Badrakuma. Moscow views the NATO expansion, first such move since 2009, as a provocation, which according to the Russian Foreign Ministry has the real potential to bring about confrontation and will only further complicate relations between Russia and NATO. Significantly, NATO meeting on Wednesday discussed a new southern strategy for the alliance in response to Russia's growing military presence south of the Bosphorus, focusing on, according to the alliance's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, a range of measures including increased surveillance and reconnaissance activities across the Mediterranean by NATO forces, deployment of NATO troops in advisory roles in the Middle East, and reinforced permanent NATO military deployments in the region. Saying that all things taken into account, Moscow's disclosure last week that it has delivered S-300 missile system to Iran should be seen in perspective. Moscow anticipates that a showdown over Syria and Iraq may be nearing. What with the West inciting Turkey to challenge the current Russian and Iranian thrust in the conflict zones in Syria and Iraq. Moscow's assessment is borne out by the latest news that Turkey has made a stunning move to rush a battalion of crack troops with tanks and heavy artillery in Mosul in the night of Thursday. At a stroke, the great game tensions have assumed dangerous proportions. Turkey did not take permission from the Iraqi government. Baghdad has reacted furiously, calling the incursion a gross violation of the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and demanding that Ankara should withdraw the troops from Iraqi soil, while Ankara maintains funnily that its troops hope to provide training to the Iraqi forces. Ankara knows jolly well that Iran has special interests in Iraq. The return of Turkish troops to Mosul after nearly a century becomes a poignant moment in Middle East's modern history. Turkey had never reconciled itself with the loss of the great oil fields in the region to the north of Mosul. The great difference today, of course, is that Britain and France are Turkey's allies, and Turkey itself can take shelter under NATO's wings. Saying, to be sure, Syria and Iraq are fast becoming the setting of a first-rate showdown between Turkey, a NATO member country on one side, and Russia and Iran on the other. There is no need to second-guess where the allegiance to the US or NATO will lie if the push comes to shove. Mr. Badrakum, in my view, calls it right. It's difficult to work out who is leading whom between NATO and Erdogan. Turkey accused Russia of a provocation on Sunday after a serviceman on the deck of a Russian naval ship allegedly held a rocket launcher on his shoulder as the vessel passed through Istanbul. I'll put up that photograph. Iraq is demanding the immediate withdrawal of Turkish forces from its territory. Aaron Stein and Bloomberg, this latest deployment increases Turkey's presence and without question will be viewed as part of a larger project to annex Iraqi territory. The senior advisor, top foreign policy advisor to the supreme leader in Iran, said Bashar Assad is the Islamic Republic of Iran's red line because he was elected president by the Syrian people. Let me put up a photograph of Ali Akbar Velayati. But we knew that. ISIS uses young boys to hunt down and kill prisoners in ruined Syrian castle for gory propaganda video. Use child fighters to murder 6 prisoners in a ruined castle in a twisted take on hide and seek for its latest gory propaganda video. It's a really macabre merging of PlayStation with Islamic fundamentalism, in inverted commas. Put up a photograph of a Typhoon warplane flying over RAF Akrotiri, which is in Cyprus, and leave you finally on the political side with this. We are thus facing an extremely dangerous situation. The Russian forces in Syria are comparatively weak and isolated. Turkey can and will continue its provocations under the cover of NATO. The West is now preparing an illegal intervention inside Syria. The Western intervention will be made against Syria and Russia. NATO politicians now have an easy way to score patriotic points by provoking Russia. If we strip all the NATO verbiage about defending our members, what is happening now is that the empire has apparently decided that going down the road to war is safe because Russia will not dare start a war. In other words, this is a game of chicken in which one side dares the other to do something about it. This is exactly what Putin was referring to when he said, if they expected a nervous or hysterical reaction from us, if they wanted to see us become a danger to ourselves as much as to the world, they won't get it. They won't get any response meant for show or even for immediate political gain. They won't get it. Our actions will always be guided primarily by responsibility to ourselves, to our country, to our people. What the imperial deep state is missing is the fact that Russia might not have a choice but to confront the empire. So pretty volatile right now, I must say. Currency markets, euro, last time I checked 108.62, but let me pull that up again. 108.64, dollar index 98.25, Japanese yen 123.29, Swiss C 0.9987, pound 151.09, Aussie 0.7333, India rupee 66.635, South Korean won 1166.56, Rial 375.43, Egyptian pound 784.83, and the Rand 1436.36. Let me put up a 1 month chart of the dollar index. You can see it took a knockback, notwithstanding the fact that everyone thinks they're going to hike rates this month. Euro dollar, Draghi disappointed, big old rebound. Look at this 1 month chart and see how much it surged. Gold also has popped higher, now trading around the 1085 level. I'll put up a 1 month chart of that. Crude oil below $40 a barrel. I'll put up a 1 month chart of that. OPEC huffed and puffed, but nothing really came out of it. Seychelles presidential race heads into second round. 115 islands, 93,000 people went to the polls to pick a new president on December the 3rd. The incumbent, President James Michel, 71, won 47.76% of the votes that were cast. His closest challenger, 33.93%. Michel, who has served for 2 terms, was part of a group that seized power in a bloodless coup in 1977. His party has won elections since 1993, when multi-party politics resumed, and it has been in power for 38 years. I cannot see the ruling party losing this. I was in the Seychelles, and I wrote this on the 2nd of November. I'm writing this article from Nigh, which is one of 115 islands that make up the Seychelles archipelago, which lies 1,500 kilometers off East Africa. Seychelles has a population of 90,000, the smallest population of any independent African state. The Minister for Finance, Trade and the Blue Economy, Jean-Paul Adam, informed me that the Seychelles receives tourists 3 times its population every year. If Kenya were to receive the same ratio of tourists, we would be welcoming 120 million tourists a year. They had a tough time during the Lehman crash. They've come out of it. And then I shared with you that time when we were coming back on I think it was a Saturday night on a ferry, and it was a very bizarre experience we had. Young people on age, and I don't know, it was a deep insight actually that day. Let me put up a photograph of the beach in the Seychelles. This was a beautiful beach that we were on. Another photograph of a quiver trees under the Milky Way in Namibia. The photos from Erez Maron, and wonderful photograph it is. The China export story is quite strong. The Africa export story is the one that's vulnerable, and there's a gap there they're going to have to massage politically. China's commercial relationship with the continent is changing, and it's going to have to reframe itself, said Simon Fremantle. Standard Bank expects the value of African exports to China to fall by as much as 40% in value terms year on year in 2015 to about 60 billion. Assuming that Chinese exports to Africa remain flat, Africa's trade deficit with China would hit $47 billion. Then talking about how low-skill industries such as textiles that have left China are more likely to set up in densely populated South or Southeast Asia. There are only a few countries that offer the kind of labour force and infrastructure that China needs, such as Ethiopia, where you have cheap labour, electricity and a compliant government. Others are hoping for more financial support as they grapple with fiscal deficits and slowing growth, but the Angola model, in which Chinese infrastructure investment is tied to resource extraction, is being tested by low commodity and oil prices. Most Chinese banks would face write-offs of their African loans if commodity prices stay low. That's just a business risk. I think that if that happens, then the Chinese banks should rethink their business strategy. 3 female suicide bombers have blown themselves up at a market in Chad, killing at least 27 people. 3, I mean, it's just appalling what's going on, using children, indoctrinating them. Thousands of refugees have been fleeing to Lake Chad in recent months in efforts to escape the Boko Haram's violent insurgency in Nigeria. They have arrived to become the target of yet more attacks, with previous suicide bombings targeting fish markets and refugee camps. Fitch cut South Africa's credit rating one level to BBB- on December the 4th, changed the outlook to stable. South African all-share, which has been up for a considerable amount of time, has turned negative for the year, minus 0.98%. It's fallen 9.75% since November 4. MTN Nigeria increased, their fine was increased to $3.9 billion after a regulator error. There was a typo, said the Nigerian Communication Commission spokesman. Dollar Rand, I'll put up a 6-month chart. I think we're going to see 15. Egyptian pound 784.83. Egyptian stock market up 0.86%. It had a good week last week. It's down 23.4% year to date, however. Nigerian all shares down 20.27% year to date. Zimbabwe light at the end of a long dark tunnel. Robert Mugabe's era is drawing to a close, but what comes next? In any event, the post-Mugabe struggle is in full swing. It could turn violent. The outcome is uncertain. The least awful, plausible scenario is that once Mr. Mugabe goes, a sensible path towards economic re-engagement can be charted, perhaps under the aegis of Mr. Mnangagwa or another ZANU-PF figure, leading to a proper election in 2018 and Zimbabwe's return from hell, but there is a long way to go. President Mugabe's mother lived to more than 100. He's in his 90s. And I think Grace Mugabe implodes on President Mugabe's departure. My piece over the weekend was called Drinking the Kool-Aid. Joshua Oigara, the CEO of KCB, tweeted this about Patrick Njoroge, the central bank governor. I salute the governor. He is no longer new, an exponential pragmatist, and I love this, a masterstroke fellow. Wouldn't it be good to be a masterstroke fellow? I concur. The central bank has been more expansive of late, and in an interview with Bloomberg last week said this: there's a political economy dimension to many things. That is something that is much more challenging. It's not something that I fully appreciated before. This comment looped me back to the fact that the Jubilee government was in fact a big and bold experiment in technocratic government. According to an article in The Economist headline Minds Like Machines, November 2011, even before Plato conceived the philosopher king, people yearned for clever, dispassionate, and principled government. When the usual run of rulers proves cowardly, indecisive, or discredited, turning to the wisdom and expertise of a technocrat is particularly tempting. Part of the attraction of the term technocrat, however, is that the label is so stretchy. Does it mean just any expert in government or one from outside politics? How many technocrats and in which positions justify a government's technocratic label? Does such an administration operate within the political system or supplant it? For how long can a technocrat evolve into a politician, and vice versa? The answers are imprecise and shift over time. Given that the answers are imprecise and shift over time, recent events here in Kenya confirm a collision between technocracy and politics. In particular, the hullabaloo over the Eurobond is a perfect example of this collision to which I'm referring. On one side, those who have imbibed the Kool-Aid are convinced that billions of Eurobond funds, latest figure coalesced around 110 billion shillings, have vanished. The National Treasury put out a technocratic 18-page rebuttal last week. The point is that in such a matter, there is an empirical answer, and it's not binary. The facts, as laid out, are either right or they are wrong. But ask yourself, how many folks have read the entire document? A lot of people are relying on the document to be interpreted for them. That process of interpretation and dissemination is a political one. It started with locking onto the figure of 110 billion, and just repeating that figure. Sunday it switched to Qatar National Bank's participation. This interpretive feedback loop could carry on like this ad infinitum, because such is the conundrum of a technocratic government, in that it is operating in a febrile political arena. Have a look at my interview with the Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich. Kenya has secured a $1.5 billion loan from China to extend its railway from the capital to the Rift Valley town of Naivasha. The faster railway being built from the Indian Ocean port of Mombasa is expected to reach Nairobi next year and open up to commercial services in mid-2017. Kenya and China signed a financing package for the extension. China Exim Bank will provide a $1.5 billion loan, 85% of the financing. Let me put up a photograph of the Mombasa-Nairobi railway seen just outside the entrance to Savo East. Another photograph of the railway crossing at Manyani Gate, again at Savo. The shilling quite well behaved, 102.15. Nairobi All Share down 12.03% this year, and the NSE 20 down 21.95% this year. Once again, thank you for stopping.